Hey everyone, Mark Schondorf, injury attorney. I'm here at the North Suburban Physicians Group in Niles. My good friend Dr. Hovig Vartanian.
How's it going, Mark?
Doing well, how are you?
Doing great.
So today, Dr. Hovig is going to show us his facility. We're going to talk about his patients, how he treats them if they're injured in car accidents, injured slip and falls, things like that, sports injuries as well. So Doc, let's take a look around.
Follow me.
So what happens? Somebody gets injured. What's the process?
Well, typically they come fill out information from our front desk where we take our history. And they come into one of our exam rooms where we come on in here and we will examine them and we will determine what kind of problem they have and what kind of severity of the problem is. And then from there we decide whether we're going to take an x-ray or not. And from there we go to the x-ray room.
Let's go check it out.
Well, here we have our x-ray room, and this is where when a patient has had some kind of trauma, we will more likely than not have an x-ray done. And that's where we do the digital x-rays, where we get to see the results almost immediately. And we have Shannon here, who's also a doctor, Dr. Shannon Burke. She will be our model for today, and I'll show you what it's like to get an x-ray here. So more often than not, we will have x-rays done in what we call a motion analysis. Basically what that does is it measures the patient in different motions, whether it's bringing their neck forward, backwards, their lower back forward or backwards. So typically when you go and have an x-ray done in a lot of facilities, they will do something called static x-rays. Static x-rays are patients standing still and not moving, and that doesn't always do a good job of detecting slight imperceptible issues. When we notice things like that on an x-ray, we will send them out for a reading for something called CRMA, which stands for Computerized Radiological Mensuration Analysis. Motion analysis is a great way of detecting small problems that can lead to bigger issues down the road.
So let me ask a couple of questions before you start talking about this stuff. So most people have never heard of a range of motion x-ray. Right?
Yes.
And that's because everybody thinks of a standard x-ray is just, stand there, you take a picture, that's the picture. So why would somebody use a dynamic range of motion x-ray?
Well, I usually tell patients it's kind of like if a person were to have a limp. When they're standing still, you can't tell they have a limp until they start walking. Once they start walking, you can see it. Similar on an x-ray, if a person is standing still, you're not going to see the details of what's happening to their spine when they're bending forward or bending backwards. So we'll have them bend forward for their low back or their neck and bend backwards. And also from side to side. So if you were to turn around, bend to the right, we'll take a picture, and bend to the left, we'll take a picture. What that does is it brings out some of the damage that might have occurred that's not going to show up in a static x-ray.
Well, this damage that you're talking about, does it show up in, for example, an MRI?
Not always. Sometimes you will have an MRI where most of the MRIs that are done in static posture, and with that you're only going to see if there's a disc bulge and or herniation. And if you don't have that, a lot of times people will say, well, you don't really have a problem, but that's not true. So that's why we like the dynamic range of motion x-rays, because that way we can pick up the small, imperceptible issues.
All right. These people you're saying will say you don't have a problem. They wouldn't happen to be the insurance companies in a car accident lawsuit, for example?
They can be, yes.
Right. And so what happens is they look at these x-rays and they say, there's nothing showing up here, there's nothing wrong, right?
Yeah, they like to say unless there's a fracture and or disc herniation or bulge, they don't really consider anything else real damage, which is not true.
And so what kind of damage is the range of motion x-ray picking up?
It's picking up ligament injuries, and ligament injuries is the most common injuries in any type of sports injury, accident, falls, things like that.
So what are we looking at, Doc?
Well, we're looking at the spine. This is the lower half of the spine, which we call the lumbar, the middle back, which is called the thoracic, and the cervical spine. And this is the back of the skull right over here. Most car accidents or falls or sports injuries will require the spine to go back and forth. And what ends up happening is there's ligaments in the front and the side and in the back that end up getting torn. And they're not perceived very well on a static x-ray. So that's why we like to do the motion x-rays.
So now these ligaments, I mean, they're covering the spine, right? They're
Correct.
basically like I would think of it as like a banana peel that's wrapped around, if these would be like poker chips inside of a banana peel, that's kind of what I always envision it. And they essentially go, what, top to bottom?
Correct.
Yeah.
They go all the way up and down your spine from the front and from the back as well and to the sides.
So we talked before about the CRMA. So what happens when we're doing a dynamic range of motion x-ray, one of these motion x-rays? So what we're doing is when we take the x-ray, we're really stressing, this isn't moving around as much, right? We want to have the person lean to the left and lean to the right, but what do we do with that motion x-ray? What does it show us?
Well, it shows us whether someone has any type of ligament tear. We send it to a radiologist that specifically does CRMA, which measures how much the vertebrae is moving. And excessive motion is an indication that you have a ligament tear and eventually a ligament laxity.
So who is doing this CRMA, this analysis?
The company we send it to is Spinal Kinetics.
And I mean, are they doctors? Are they?
Yeah, they're radiologists, medical doctor, radiologist, and basically we send them the X-rays, and along with the radiologist and a computer that measures the excessive motion, gives us a result of how far the motion is and why and we determine at that point whether it's something that is causing the patient's pain.
So let me ask another question. So how do you know if a patient needs a range of motion X-ray?
Typically, and I see this quite a bit, it's a patient who's been in some kind of trauma and they've really done nothing about it, or they haven't been taken care of properly or diagnosed properly from the get-go. This is why the dynamic motion x-ray, in my opinion, is very important from the beginning, because that way it'll determine exactly where the problem is, if there is a problem there, and you can do your treatment accordingly based on what the results are of the test.
So now let's say somebody comes in with they experience a spinal ligament injury. So how is that treated?
Well, depending on what level it's at, we will start off by doing soft tissue work, which is the muscles around the neck.
And when you say level, is it what level of the spine, or is it the level of injury?
Both. Well, at the level of the spine, if it's the neck, we will do a lot of traction of the neck. We will do a lot of stretching of the neck. We will provide them with stabilization exercises. They will get stimulation and ultrasound in the back to help with the swelling and irritation and help strengthen some of the muscles that need to be strengthened for them to become more stable down the road.
Now, let me ask this. If somebody has a major spinal ligament injury, is there a way to heal that injury?
Well, there'll always be, if there's a major injury, there could be what we call a ceiling of improvement. And the more severe the injury, the lower that ceiling is going to be. But what's really important is that to establish what that ceiling is from the get-go. So if there's a severe injury from the beginning, you want perspective of how long it's going to take and how well you're going to recover. So that way the patient knows and they realize that this is not something they want to wait on and they want to address it immediately.
Right. But now, if there's a tear in the ligaments in the spine, is there a way to fix that tear, or is it always going to be that way?
It's always going to be that way to a certain degree. It will heal, but it won't heal completely.
And that's even for a minor injury versus a major injury?
Correct. It's just a matter of how bad the healing will be.
So once someone has a major spinal ligament injury, like a tear, really the only possible surgical intervention with them would be the spinal fusion to make sure those vertebrae don't move around.
At this point, that's really all that I know about. Yeah, that they would do.
Wow.
Yeah, which is significant.